Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're joined today in the studio with Mohamed Jamaal, Shaukat Patel from MEND, Rafiq Musa from Unite the Union, and Maulana Uzair. I'm not sure what organisation he's representing at the moment, but Kidm organisation, let's say. Today, inshallah, we're going to be talking about Islamophobia, politics, why Muslims should engage in politics, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a political leader. We're just going to start off with some introductions, so I'm going to pass it over to Shaukat Bhai firstly.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Mohamed Jamaal, thank you for the introduction, and assalamu alaikum to all our listeners. Hoping you are having a blessed day, mashallah. As Brother Jamal said, alhamdulillah, I'm a volunteer for an organisation called MEND, Muslim Engagement and Development, and we tackle Islamophobia, we tackle hate, we engage the Muslim community, we empower the Muslim community, inshallah, to play a more active role and make the changes they want to see in this world.
Yeah, pass it over to Rafiq.
Yes, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Rafiq Musa, so I live locally. And in terms of Unite the Union, I've been an activist and I sit on their regional committee for the last 20 or so years. And my involvement in the trade union movement has been for the last 25 years.
Okay, and then finally, Maulana Uzair.
Assalamu alaikum, Maulana Uzair. Not really part of an organisation like our two distinguished guests here.
You got Kidm organisation.
Kidma organisation, okay, if you allow it. Kidma organisation.
And then myself, Mohamed Jamaal, and inshallah I'm going to be representing Kidm organisation. I think we've got 2 weeks until the local elections are taking place in Leicester, so I thought it was a good time, or quite an important time to talk about the importance of politics for Muslims and Islamophobia, because I think that's something which is very, very prevalent in society today, and it's only appropriate we have Shaukat Bhai, who's the expert on this plague we have in the society today. And as he touched upon, Muslim engagement and development have been at the forefront of fighting Islamophobia, equipping our communities with the stats and statistics against this plague in the society today. And Shaukat Bhai, can you tell us a bit more about MEND? Who are they? What do they do? And what do they offer to the communities across the UK?
So alhamdulillah, fundamentally, it's really important for everybody to know that we're a community-funded and a community-based organisation.
Mm-hmm.
We are from the people, for the people, so to speak. So I myself is a complete volunteer, and alhamdulillah, we work up and down the country. We also have volunteers in Ireland, and we have mashallah, a very big presence in Scotland. And we work essentially, as I said in my brief introduction, is to be the change we want to see. You know, Jamal, when I do this work, a lot of people, very briefly, as I said this the other day as well, at a presentation I gave, they come up to me and say, mashallah, there's three things that they say to me. Mm-hmm. Firstly, they say, mashallah, this work is really important, you know, tackling hate, tackling Islamophobia, getting politically engaged. It's really, really important. And then they say, good luck, Shaukat Bhai, I'm off. And I'll be like, hey, where are you going? You know what I mean? I'm a volunteer as well. The second thing is those, mashallah, you know, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. We can't change anything. It's all in the hands of Allah. You know, we're just going to stay and do what we know, and Allah's going to change everything. And for me, Allah knows best. Allah knows best. But for me, if our forefathers and our predecessors had that ideology, Islam wouldn't have left the Arabian Peninsula. If they didn't. And finally, the third one is, well, you know, Shaukat Bhai, other people control everything. We haven't got any say. You know, other people, other organizations, other communities, other faith groups, they control the media, they control the council. And that is the one that really gets me, because nobody gives anybody anything for free in this world. Nobody gets a leg up. People take the opportunities that they have. So therefore, as men, we really encourage the Muslim community to engage in areas that you can make a real change. And politics is one of those areas that, you know, you have to go in and be the change and change from within. And that is one of the things we do, that we encourage people to engage in the political process. And it doesn't matter who you belong to, but be a positive change for a community and be a positive change for the Muslim community.
Alhamdulillah, I know some beautiful points you touched upon there. And one of the things you mentioned, which I myself, I think, and a lot of Muslims come out with, like, just leave it in the hands of Allah. You know, that whatever happened will happen. But I think with that, there's always a fine balance, isn't there? I mean, there's a hadith about the Prophet ﷺ where he said about the Sahaba radiallahu anhu who, when he used to go out, he would just leave his camel out, and he would just say to the Sahaba used to say to him, "What are you doing with your camel? Why are you just leaving it out?" Like at that time, Mullah always tells us a camel was equivalent of a Mercedes. You wouldn't just leave your Mercedes unlocked and parked in the middle of a road. And Sahaba used to say, "Oh, my trust is in Allah. Allah will deal with it." Then the Rasulullah ﷺ said to the Sahaba that we need to still tie our camel. We don't just leave the camel untied. We tie our camel, and then the trust is in Allah. But Marazah, what do you say to that statement? Because I think it's something we see quite a lot, where when we're trying to engage the Muslim community, when we're trying to tell them to get involved in politics, getting involved in recognizing Islamophobia, fighting Islamophobia, and they just say that, just make dua, everything will be in Allah's hands. Where's the fine line, and where's the balance with that, Mullah?
I think ultimately that's epitomizing the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, when you see an evil, then you try to change that evil by action. And if you cannot do so by action, then you change it through words. And if you cannot change it through your words, then you change it in your heart, or you at least feel something in your heart. And the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, when regards to just feeling it in your heart, ذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ, that is the lowest level of iman. So the penultimate level of iman is actually trying to make a change. And that's what Shaukat Bhai was mentioning just now, is that those people who actually want to do something, those are the people that are the penultimate ambassadors of our religion and the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
And if we pass it over to Rafiq, or a lot of people out there might know him as aka Striker. I know ever since I've been young, you've always been involved in politics and engaging the community. And in that community, I think you don't see many people who are involved in politics and people to look up to as role models. How have you found the communities changing over the years, and what do you think the current state of affairs is for Muslims in Leicester and involved in politics?
So, going back to my time when I first got involved, because I think I've got to put a little bit of context in it, that for us as a community, and I'll say us South Asian community, Indians, Gujaratis, we've always been guilty of saying, "Oh, somebody else will do it for us. It's fine. Biju koi kar se." We'll get involved from the sidelines on an election day, if there's an election or whatever it may be, or if there's an election in the masjid or anything like that. But somebody else will do that. Somebody else will do that. We haven't got time. Run the business, do a profession. And one of the reasons would be most of the institutions that make decisions, whether it be in the trade union, whether it be politically for any party, they tended to be white male institutions, and we didn't understand how those institutions work. So for me, I was fortunate that at a very young age, early on, I got involved in the trade union. And the trade union is no different to any political party as well in the way it's structured. It's got democratic process, it's got members of that union, and they have an election, and the leadership of that election run everything. So I got involved very early on in that, and fortunately for me, because knowledge is power, there were a few people who were willing to share that knowledge with me and show me how the levers of power within the trade union work. And I was amazed how few people made decisions for millions of people. So in my union, as a whole, so that I'm a member of United Union, it's got 1.2 million members that pay their membership fees.
Nice.
And there's an election running right now. In that election, less than 7% will vote.
Wow.
They will decide on behalf of everybody else. So our General Secretary, who got voted last year in, one of the most powerful General Secretaries in this country, she got elected on a mandate of less than 100,000 people. And in all organisations where people are elected, I realised how few people decided who was going to make decisions on your behalf. So in terms of politics, I got involved very early on. I realised that it's not actually the voters. The voters are the most important people. It's actually whichever party you're affiliated to, the members of that party decide who's going to be the person they choose to represent them in a constituency. And if that is a safe constituency, they're pretty much in. So as you would say in simple terms, you can stick the badge of any party on that donkey and they're elected because the margin is so high. Now, in tightly folk constituencies, you know, it's a different thing. So I learned very early on, and in terms of our community, I still have that view right now, that we're all keyboard warriors, we'll all go on social media, have a view and opinion, but when I ask somebody that, look, why don't you get involved? Why don't you go to those committee meetings? Why don't you become politically active for whichever party you want to become politically active for? Oh, I'm too busy, you know, I've got to go on holiday, I've got to do this. And it's still the same now. Very few people make those decisions, yet we have the ability to change that. So that's where I kind of got involved. I'd like to think things will change. You know, young people get engaged, but, you know, we're trying. People like Shokabay are trying to, you know, educate people to say, look, you can have a say, huge say, you know, but you've got to be willing to put a bit of effort in.
And just adding on to what Rafiq Bhai says, it's very important. It might be, you know, being a bit cynical, but it is in people's interests to keep us apathetic, keep us distracted with other things, what dance shows on Saturday and who you're going to vote for, and people are changing the world around us. If we are not going to be that change, it's not going to happen. And I keep repeating that we have to be the change.
So, just for people out there listening and tuning in just now, we're talking about Islamophobia and politics, and as Mend very well defines the Islamophobia. Islamophobia is rooted in racism. Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expression of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. So that's the APPG on British Muslim definition of Islamophobia. And we find that time and time again in the media, like just most recently, that there was some attacks which took place in Ramadan. How important is it for communities to get behind recognizing Islamophobia and reporting it, and where does the community come to play a part in helping us to get this Islamophobia recognized and the recognition it achieves, recognition it needs?
That's a really important question, actually. Look, as the Muslim community, we're not asking for preferential treatment. We're just asking for parity. So racism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, all hates are equal. You know, we just have statistically, I know people can just throw this, but you know, we make up, 6% of the population? 6% of the population. Last year's official statistics from England and Wales, 2021 to 2022, was that close to 50% of all religiously motivated hate crimes were committed against Muslims. So we make up 6% of the population, and that is the official figures. There are by far many, many more. I always remember a sister saying to me, Shokabay, if you want me to report every time somebody says something about my niqab, that's all I'll be doing all day, because she didn't live in a conventional Muslim area. So, you know, hate crime against Muslims, you know, kids at school, I get called, who are being bullied to such an extent because of their faith that they change their name. So they've abbreviated their name because they don't want it to be sounding a Muslim name. They go into skin whitening cream. Our youngest person that we've assisted as an organization was a 4-year-old or 5-year-old, I think she was 5-year-old, and she's given us a testimony that she used to come home and she was full of bruises. And then when her mother asked her, why are you full of bruises? And this is what they recorded, her saying that, he goes, my friend pinches me because she says I'm a Muslim and we don't like Muslims. So this is starting from that age to elderly gentlemen being murdered on the streets of Birmingham. So it goes throughout the whole spectrum. And like we've said before, if we do not stand up for it, nobody else is going to stand up for it. So that is why it's really important that Islamophobia comes in many guises. It could be somebody saying that people from the Muslim community are responsible for grooming of young girls. That is an Islamophobia trope, you know, and that has so much. And then it comes to our sisters having their hijabs pulled off, or called names, or Muhammad not being given an interview despite having the same CV as Adam, as BBC's survey research found that you're 3 times less likely to even get a job interview. So it encompasses the whole structure of society. As Muslims, we don't want preferential treatment. We want it to be on the same plane and the same consequences for anybody who's been accuser of it or guilty of it as you would do for anti-Semitism, homophobia or racism.
So you just touched upon many like alarming statistics and figures there, and one of the ones which personally I found the most shocking when I heard for the first time was that an organisation called Inside Out London sent CVs from 2 candidates called Adam and Mohammed with identical skills and experience in response to 100 job opportunities. The findings that they got back from that was that the CV with the name Adam on it was offered 12 interviews, while Muhammad was only offered 4. So that just hearing that for me for the first time, it just was staggering, wasn't it? I mean,
and then it puts Muslims on the lower socioeconomic position. They're already disadvantaged.
Mm-hmm.
Then they can't get a job. Then it's like, look at these Muslims, they're not even working. So there's a lot of things that goes behind the scenes that we're not aware of, that people find it so difficult. And a lot of cases that we work on as well, Mohamed Jamaal, is we find that sisters with hijabs in promotion time often get overlooked, and brothers with beards as well. And so it's really, really difficult. And if you happen to be a Muslim, a sister that wears a hijab, and then if you happen to be black, you get the quadruple penalty, and it's really, really difficult.
Jeep. So, Rafiq, in terms of, I think you touched upon Unite the Union, and that the fact that when it comes to the elections, only 6% of the mandate actually vote or come out and vote for, and in the end it becomes that the decisions are being only represented for 6%. We see a similar thing with the politics in Leicester when it comes to UK. How important is it, or how do we engage Muslims to get more involved getting involved in these decisions which decide what happens for majority of the Muslims of the UK? I know, as Shokab I mentioned, 6%. There's only 6% Muslims in the UK, but 50% of racially motivated crimes are faced by Muslims. So it's very important for us to get involved in these positions of power. But how do we do that? How do we get Muslims engaged?
So I think that probably breaks down into 2 areas. One is, how do you engage in politics as a whole? So, which political parties do you engage with? And the second part of it is probably what influences political decision makers, yeah? So who influences those political decision makers, and how do you get involved with those people who influence political decision makers? So if I take the people who influence political decision makers, from my role as a trade union, our union has, we have a huge political department. We have a huge political budget, and whilst we are, historically associated with the labour movement because we are the movement of labour, our union will speak to any party that is in power. So they will regularly lobby Conservative government ministers to represent our members. Now, when it comes to, say, our community as a Muslim community and things that we care passionately about, and we care passionately about equality across the board, no matter what your religion is, the trade union movement have been some of the strongest and loudest advocates for things that we care passionately about. Palestine, the Rohingyas, India, Kashmir. When you go to some of these protests, you look around and you think, well, there tends to be more white faces than there seems to be Asian faces at these meetings, because they care passionately about that, yeah? They're always at the forefront of these campaigns. So if you don't want to get involved politically, then if you're in a workplace, at least get involved in organisations that have huge influence over political parties, because they have the resource and they have the departments. They're able to facilitate that. When the apartheid movement was there, the trade unions were at the forefront, and they didn't care what anybody else said. They campaigned in that. So what I always say to people is that, look, however difficult it may look, however white male it may look, nobody's born into that job. Nobody has all the information that they need. You can get that information as well. And once you learn the process, it becomes very easy. If anything, it becomes easier than most people realise, because, especially organisations like that, they will have allocated seats, minimum allocated seats for ethnic minorities. Minimum, proportional that they have to make, not a maximum, minimum. So it will say that if our executive is made up of 50 people, a minimum of 15 of those have got to come from black ethnic minority people. Minimum. And that's where you take your causes, and that's where you can lobby and use the might and power that they have to influence politics. Politics as a whole, we can't sit on the sidelines. People have to get involved. They can start small, get involved in local community organisations, but if we don't, we'll be in the same situation in 20 years' time. We'll be moaning from the sidelines that we're unhappy about how certain decisions are made. So, educate is very easy to learn, but get involved, definitely.
Okay, so over to Morazat. We want to have get your views. Alhamdulillah, I had the benefit and of sitting in your Seerah class for the past 2.5 years, where you went through the details of the Prophet ﷺ's life in so much with so much love and muhabba. And you talked. One of the things I took away from the Seerah, which you touched upon very eloquently, was like how politically active the Prophet ﷺ was. And I think there is definitely a stigma in our community, as Rafiq and Brother Shokat talked about as well, of getting involved in politics. But in the Seerah, could you tell us more about the Seerah and how the Prophet ﷺ was a political leader?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was politically active way before he became a messenger. A lot of people don't know that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was actively involved in politics before he was a messenger, and an example of that is the Hilful Fudul. In the Hilful Fudul, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he entered into a treaty amongst the Quraysh, and that treaty essentially what it was people used to come from out of Mecca, and they were being robbed of their money, and they were being looted for. So the Quraysh, they came up with a pact that they're going to unite against an oppressor, regardless of what faith, what religion that oppressor is, whether he's a Qurashi or whether he's a non-Qurashi. Everyone is going to unite against an oppressor. And the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he participated in that hilf, in that treaty. And the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, years later, he goes that I participated in the Hilful Fudul, that if I was to witness it today, I would still participate in it today. And he goes that it was more beloved to me, or it is more beloved to me than 1,000 red camels. And as you've mentioned, red camels back in those days, they were the equivalent of a Mercedes-Benz, a top-range Mercedes-Benz. So 100 Mercedes-Benz it was more beloved to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam to be actively involved in these kind of politics. And it was throughout the seerah. The first step the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam took when he became the political leader of Madinatul Munawwara sallallahu alaihi wasallam was enacting a treaty, the Bay'atul Aqaba. The first thing was that bay'ah, and that was for everyone that was living in Medina. That the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted to ensure all of them had rights. The Christians had rights, the Jews had rights, the pagans had rights, the Muslims had rights. All of them shared equal rights. And I think, Shakaba, you mentioned that one of the things that we Islamophobia or men are trying to do is to ensure that there's equal rights for all. And that is exactly what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam did in Medina. He made sure the Jews had rights as much as the Muslim had rights. In fact, when it came to judgments, at times the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam would side with the Jews or the Christians against the Muslims, against the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. Why? Because he was fair and he was just. So, just a little bit from the seerah. I could go on, but got more distinguished guests, inshallah.
No, alhamdulillah, it's really beautiful to hear that those words from Mullah was there, touching upon the life of Prophet, and I'm sure we can continue on and tell us a bit more about how Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was politically active. But going back to Shokat Bhai, just following on from what Mullah Uzair said, and I know that men run many campaigns which aim to get Muslims involved in elections and getting them out to vote. And I myself remember a few years ago when the general elections came and men had the Muslim vote, which took the population of Muslims in all the cities across the UK and showed the power that the Muslims had to actually sway the vote in marginal areas across the city. And right now they're running the Get Out and Vote campaign. How how does that work, Shokabai? What is the Get Out and Vote campaign, and how important is it for Muslims to utilize that right that we have to vote?
As a community, Muslims tend to live, we're not scattered around the country. We live in concentrated areas where we have a lot of influence. Now, as Muslims, we don't block vote, and neither should we, because we're not, like sheep. We don't believe in all the same thing. But what we should recognize is that as a community, we should hold people accountable. And if we're going to give somebody our vote, then they should be made aware that we will hold them accountable. And therefore, as an organization, what we do, we take the concerns of the Muslim community. No one organization can say they represent the whole Muslim community, but we take a broad concern of the Muslim community, 10 manifesto points, 10 pledge points, and we present them to all the political parties, that as Muslims we are concerned about halal food. Okay, we are concerned about that ladies could wear whatever they want to. If that means they want to cover their faces, they will cover their faces. If they want to live within a certain, go to madrasa, Muslim education, although a very small amount do, they should have the right to do these things. So we and as Rafiq Bhai mentioned, some international concerns that the Muslim community tend to unite under the Palestinian cause, etc. So we present that to all the parties. And then we see how many of the candidates or the parties agree to those pledges, and then we present it to the community. And then we take these manifestos, and we see in which constituencies there's more Muslims. And if there's a candidate who has agreed to these, then the Muslim voters can go and see on the website, which is the Get Out and Vote website, that this candidate has agreed to all these pledges. That is going to benefit me, it's going to benefit my community, and it's going to benefit the wider community. So that is one of the things that we do when you Get Out and Vote campaign, is to let the candidates know that these are the concerns. Which of these concerns are you going to implement? Which of these pledges are you going to promise to the Muslim community? The Muslim community can then make up their mind. We do not advocate any political party. We just present the cases that the Muslim community is concerned about, and then make sure that the parties adhere to them.
And I mean, some of the things you touched upon, like for example, like the right to wear the hijab. I mean, I know many times you've mentioned this, and we've heard it before. I mean, we think that that's just a given right, be able to wear hijab, walk around freely. But there's so many Muslims who live in France who years ago they thought they had that same freedom to be able to express their religion. And they weren't a part of the political system as such. And we've seen what happened in France, that ability was just taken over. That ability to wear the hijab and express religion freely was taken. And you put it, I think we've heard it many times before, if we as Muslims in the UK aren't careful, we could see that happening in 5 to 10 years if we don't get involved in the system and if we don't take a part into the system.
Yeah, absolutely. France is geographically very close to us. Yeah, some people who are fit like Rafiq could probably swim there. Yeah. It's that close. Okay, and you see the horrendous. They have a very different type of democracy. Though the French is obviously I can't remember the exact term what they call it, but you have to be French above anything else in that country. So one of the things that we've been really proud of in the last couple of years in this country is the Premier League is stopping for iftar. They give you a few seconds, the players can break their fast. And I think it was a Leicester City player that did it first of all, Wesley Fofana. But in France, they've categorically said that we're not going to do that. And the Premiership is the league in the world, right? In terms of, and alhamdulillah, at least we are fortunate enough, and they've not allowed it. But I just want to take you somewhere which is a bit further away, geographically, but culturally, to all four of us and many of our listeners, is close to us from where we are, which is India. Which, growing up, let's face it, we learned our deen through what was taught to our ulama and scholars in India. That was our hub. I had to learn Urdu at madrasa because all the kitabs were written, and giving my age away there, because they were all written in Urdu. Okay, in that country, that is the hub. That's almost our motherland of our deen, so to speak. Now are going to court because they don't want to hear the azan played out in public. They're banning public areas of prayer because they say, look, they shut down a whole warehouse recently because they were praying Tarawih. How many warehouses pray Tarawih here? They shut down a whole warehouse and people got arrested because they were praying Tarawih in a warehouse. So you're not only allowed to pray in a designated area. In a population of 250 million Muslims with 600 year history there. And that, when you speak to the scholars there, and I asked one that, if you could turn back the clock, what would it be that you would change so that you would not be in the situation? And he gave me two. One is, more interfaith work, and the other one, we didn't get involved in that political. As Rafiq Bhai said, it's somebody else will do it. It's not for us. We don't do these things. And now, playing catch up. The legislators are there, things are being changed, and there's nobody to take our part. And if we think, because for Leicester, and I know you know this of me, that I go around, people look at me like, what are you talking about Islamophobia? We've got a madrasa in every corner. We've got sisters in niqab everywhere. We've got hufaz. We've got prominent ulama, not just one, two. We've got 3 or 4 that people travel around the world to come and see. But any civilization like the Roman or the Greek, when they fell, they were at their height and they got too comfortable. And I don't mean to be a doom and gloom merchant here, but if we do not make the changes and get involved now, as Rafiq Bhai said, then it's going to be a real problem for our children in the future.
I think to touch upon that, we have to remember that Islamophobia was rife in the time of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a victim of Islamophobia himself. When the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in sajda praying, and the Quraysh came and they put camel dung on the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam's back whilst he was in sajda, and it was Fatima radiyallahu anha who had to come, the daughter of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to remove it from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam's back because he couldn't get up. And you think about it, that what Shaukat Bhai is saying is that we don't want to get to a stage where we then become a society, because we're seeing it today, not necessarily here in the UK, but we're seeing it in other countries where they're having cases of much worse Islamophobia than we see here. And unless we're politically active and unless we're actually engaging with the authorities, then, na'udhu billah, Allah protect us, but we may come to that stage as well.
It's a very important point that you mentioned. And I mean, the importance of getting involved. I know, Rafiq, you mentioned that. And I mean, for a lot of us, I think personally for myself as well, I have the benefit of being your son. So I'm able to sort of see the influence that you've gained from being part of the union, being involved in politics. But for many people who are my friends, many people who I meet on the streets, who don't have that influence around them, and they don't know where to start or how to get involved, how do they go about that, and where do they start?
I think it's like with anything, you ask. Nobody knows everything. You do ask. It's not. You're not going to sound thick by asking somebody. If you don't understand something, you look it up. And the other thing as well is that, look, we have to get away from living our what we call ghetto areas where we're just isolated. I was fortunate by chance that when I was young, I was one of 2 Indians that didn't get into the local Indian school, where 99% of the population went. Yeah, fortunate. Yeah, I say fortunate now. Yeah, so didn't get a place. So I was shipped off to the other side of town in Blackburn, and I went to a school called Shadsworth. And out of the 1,200 pupils there, 1,198 were white, and me and this other guy called Hafiz were the Indian kids. That were it. We got bullied, we got battered, everything happened to us. But what that made me was very comfortable being around white people. So when I'm around a group of white people, where I am a lot of times, I don't see my colour as an issue. I don't. They might look at me, but I never see it. If I've got the ability and I've got the talent. So in my workplace, I've been like what I call a senior trade union convener for over 20 years. And I work for a large white company. It's one of the biggest printing companies in the world. I'm the senior convener in Europe. And I'm the only black person there that has that role. I'm in charge of all the white people. But when there comes to be an issue, whereas in the past they'd have said, I want Bob, I want Peter, now they say, I want Rafiq. because your ability comes through. So we have to. So I have done the hard yards, and other people will have to, but you can't be put off by it. Look, why in my days when I started, a lot of meetings would be in a pub. I won't let that put me off. You know, they all know when it was Ramzan, I'd fast. They'd have a conference in Ramzan, I'd still go to it. Yeah. Whereas other people are like, Hoibi, I'm not going in Ramzan. It's Ramzan. I would go to it. I'd travel there. I made sure they knew that I was fasting. You know, I made sure, so they knew all of those things. But you have to take part in those, whether it's political parties, whether it's local community, you know, groups which again influence, you know, things, whether it's the trade unions in this country, and you know, I talk about trade unions because that's my background, or any other parts of civil society. If you don't take part, then we're going to be in this position 20 years. I'm not as doom and gloom as, you know, Quack and Mohamed Jamaal. You know, I'm a bit more hopeful. You know, I've been fortunate to travel, you know, around the world a lot in my role with the union, and I still say that for us Muslims, England is one of the best places in the world, but we can't take that for granted. Yeah, we have things here that are given to us that people in other Muslim countries don't have. You know, Shakabhai mentioned in India, kind of, you know, look what's happening, and there's 250 million, 300 million people, and because of the government there, you know, the rise of nationalism, the rise of fascism, right, Trump, and all of that sort of things, you know, it doesn't take a long where, you know, people whip people up and that frenzy gets whipped up. But inshallah, you know, I have a lot of hope for the younger generation. They will become active. If all they're interested in is earning a wage and, you know, buying a fancy car and this, that and the other, and somebody else will do that for us, then no. But, you know, I'm hopeful that in 20 years, 30 years time, you know, we have 50 Muslims in Parliament, you know, from all different parties, where then legislators look to us as a group and a community and say, well, we can't ignore that community, because by 2050 the projections are, you know, that there'll be nearly 8-9 million Muslims in this country.
At the moment we're only representing 3%, unfortunately. So we're not even representing.
So that multiplier effect is going to kick in, and we don't want to give that voice to somebody else. At the moment, you know, sometimes people take our voices for granted, which they shouldn't do.
So how do you, in terms of your work and Shogaba as well, how do you feel the representation currently stands? Or do you think it's changing, or do you think there's still a lot more work to be done?
Simultaneous, I think a lot more work does definitely need to be done. But as Rafiq said, and especially for me, is when I meet the young people. You know, some of the events I go to at universities, some programs, I see a lot more engagement, and particularly from our sisters. From our youngsters, they're really particularly engaged. They know what they want, and because, you know, the victims of Islamophobia are nearly always sisters when it's on the streets, and they are really becoming active. And you know, you go to these really, and I've said this before, you know, in places like Canary Wharf, you know, they're working in these corporate banks, they're earning 6-figure salaries, but you know what? They want that prayer hall. And they're fighting for a prayer hall. It's easy when you live in a city like Leicester, when there's a masjid every corner, but these guys are fighting for a prayer hall when, you know, there's multi-millions of pounds flying around, but they want their prayer hall. So alhamdulillah, that gives me a lot of hope, and they're engaging in all. If you see our MPs, nearly all of them are sisters, in much higher proportion than men. So there's a lot of distractions, some manipulated distractions. People want to keep us apathetic. Some is just because we're not engaged ourselves, and we're we can't blame anybody else. You have to take up the reins. And another thing Rafiq said as well, that with his work, it doesn't matter what religion, doesn't matter which political party, you have to help everybody. And one of the things, very, very quickly, if you don't mind me saying, is that I always remember Hamza Yusuf, the American, Maulana said, and I was there, and he narrated a story that after 9/11, you know, all of a sudden the whole spotlight was on the Muslim community in America. You know, they were like this invisible people before then. 9/11, everybody wanted to see a Muslim, right? So he went to Reverend Jesse Jackson to see that, you know, how do we deal with this? You know, you guys have been fighting the civil rights cases for decades now. And the Reverend Jesse Jackson turned around and goes, where have you been all these years? Now you need us, you've come to us. You know? So if we're not going to, we need to fight for lots of cases and lots of causes that are for good and for justice, and then it will come together, inshallah.
Zed, do you have any?
I think on that point and on what Uncle Rafiq mentioned is Rafiq mentioned about actively engaging with people of different faiths and no faiths as well. And I think that isn't something that is a novelty or very new. That's something that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam actively engaged with the politicians, so-called politicians of his time. If you look at the letters that he wrote, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam wrote extensive letters to the likes of the Khusro, the Egyptian leader, the Najashi, and he actually engaged with them. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam would invite them to Madinatul Munawwara. When they would come, they would be offered, the best hospitality. In fact, I think it was the Najashi that came. When the Najashi came, or the Khusro from Egypt, when they came, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he actually got off his seat, stood up to greet him, and made the leader to sit on his seat. And the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam sat on the floor. That goes to show that we as Muslims, we need to actively engage with our politicians, with our councillors, with the authorities, so that we can make a change. Otherwise, we won't be able to. If the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam chose to not engage with these people, Islam would not have spread. Islam would not have spread, and we wouldn't be where we are today. So it's very important that we actually engage with our authorities.
No, so really good points there by all of you. And I mean, one of the things I think Shokabaya as well you touched upon.
Islam would not have spread.
Personally, I found, and others to find, like in Leicester, we have the ability. Like if you go in Highfields, people freely walking around in their jubbas, scarves, topis, and they might be walking around, and people out there might be listening, thinking, "What Islamophobia? I don't experience anything in Leicester." But personally, I mean, I found that in Leicester we live in a bubble. When you go out to the wider parts of the UK, whether it be London or like further down south and further down north, that the life we have in Leicester, it's very different from the life out there. And what would you say to people who say that, Shokabai and Rafiq?
Yeah, you're right. We do live in a bubble. Yeah, we live in and it's fine. We're comfortable where we are. But what I always say is that, people shouldn't assume that what the status quo is the same everywhere else, that what it is here. And when we become active as well, as young people, I always say to people, don't accept the status quo. Yeah, you should always be, because you just think it's all fine and everything's smooth, that can change quite easy. So you should be keeping people on their toes all the time, questioning, challenging, and also thinking about what comes after that. So who comes after Shokat Bhai? Who comes after me? Who comes after you? Who takes up the mantle? So from that perspective, if we don't, then we're just gonna go through the motions. And in 10 or 15 years' time, we'll be sat here, going through, complaining about the same small issues, and the big things will pass us by. The important things will pass us by. Why is it at this moment in time that, so much pressure comes on, political parties and governments to criticise even a little bit the Indian government? Why? Because it's trade and all of that. Why aren't we able to lobby our government to say, well, no, this is not acceptable. I'm able to do it in my union. I'm able to go into my union, put a motion forward. We have a policy conference this year, and it will become policy. So standard every year there'll be motions on Palestine condemning the actions of the Israeli government. Yeah, so not the Jewish people, the Israeli government, and we will have people that are of the Jewish faith who will get up and speak in favour of those, because they'll say our faith has got nothing to do with the actions of the Israeli government, and the way they behave. We will pass motions on Kashmir. We will pass motions on India. It's not because we're a pro-India or anti-India trade union movement, because we never passed motions 20 years ago. We only pass them because we recognise the injustices that people. So
I think we've got a caller on the line. I'm just gonna answer that.
Who comes after Shokat Bhai? Who comes after me? Who comes after you? Who takes up the mantle? So
I think we
cut them off.
Yeah.
So going back to that, going outside, we do have to get involved. We do have to become more active because what we have here in Leicester isn't necessarily replicated everywhere else. And education is a big thing. You have to educate people. That's why I always make sure wherever I go, I tell people, oh, by the way, I'm a Muslim. We're an American company, and I always say, listen, if you don't assume that everybody is kind of like anti-Muslim. A lot of people, it's just about education. In my workplace, I worked there 25 years. We put a namaz room in there about 3 or 4 years ago, not because of my actions, because one of the local managers said, Hasina Ben and Rukhsana Ben, they always pray their namaz over there. Why don't we have a namaz room? And they built a purpose-built namaz room for them. Now, they still don't use it because it's too far away from where they work. So they don't want to work 10 minutes to the other side of the factory, which is the central point, and they've got quite good, facilities in the area they work. But I just assume, because I can pop out and pay namaz, that, if we ask, the answer will be no. The white manager said, why don't you have a prayer room for Hasina and them lot? Because they need to pray.
I'll echo that sentiment and what is said. Despite all the things that we mentioned, and this is my personal opinion, and people listening at home can disagree with me, is that one of the best places to be a Muslim is the United Kingdom. But apathy is not an option. And I apologise for people who have heard me say this many a times. The Chinese proverb of the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago.
We do have to
the second best time is today. Otherwise, our children
have to
and
become
more
active.
They're going to be having more
Because
and I'll give you a perfect example of people who say that in Leicester we're very confident. Is when we did have a bit of discomfort.
That's why I always make sure wherever I go, I tell people,
riots happen between sections of our community and another community.
And I always say, listen, if you don't,
let's see
assume
the trajectory that
everybody is kind of like
if we were such a
powerful community. In my workplace, I worked there 25 years.
12 hours,
we put a namaz room in there about 3 or 4 years.
Images were being broadcast across the
one of the
world
local managers
with
said,
headlines of
Hasina Ben
Muslim
and
goons,
Rukhsana Ben, they
Pakistani
pray their
Muslim
namaz over there.
terrorists,
Why don't we have a
Muslim
namaz room? And they built a
attacking
purpose-built namaz
within
room
12
for them.
hours.
Now, they still don't
We
use
had
it because
we
it's too
had
far away
one
from where
brother
they
here
work.
had his social media and had a
So
lot of followers.
they don't want to work 10
This was
minutes
on
to the other
channels
side of the
across
factory,
the globe.
which is the central
Within
point,
24,
and they've got
within
quite
48
good,
hours, we had
facilities
the Indian
in
High
the area they
Commissioner
work. But
releasing a statement
I just
condemning the
assume,
actions
because I can pop
against
out
his
and pay
people,
namaz,
against
that,
them, despite the fact
if we ask,
250
the
million
answer will be
Muslims
no.
live in this country.
The white
Because we haven't
said,
engaged with that political level. So he's
why
not
don't
going
you
to
have a prayer
represent
room
us.
for
He's
Hasina
going to
and them lot?
represent
Because
his people, despite the fact we'll all say we're from India. Right? Within 4 days, you have a member of parliament who has nothing to do with the city of Leicester standing up and saying, my people, he's not even a Hindu, saying, my people are being attacked. And we are afraid that our celebration, our festival of Diwali will not go ahead. Where does that power come from 20 years ago? That comes from hard work, from engagement, from advocacy, from being involved. And we had no voice. Up to this point, hardly any MP has stood up for us, because we have no voice. So if we can have all this here, but it's very fragile. And anybody who knows history, anybody who can just say Andalusia, just say Spain, 800 years, and another community, where is it now? So let's see these, alhamdulillah, this is a great country. We were such a, and we have such opportunities here, but that is the reason not to be apathetic.
And just in terms of voice, what I would say is, we do have a voice, we choose not to use it. We choose not to use it in a unified manner. So you'll get odd people pop up every now and again, but we choose not to use it in a unified manner. And because of that, people, organisations take advantage of it. They do, and we shouldn't allow that. So there is opportunities for us to be involved. We have to take those opportunities. It might not happen overnight, but as long as you're willing to put the work in, then the fruits will be there in 5, 10, 15 years' time. Why has Leicester not had a Muslim MP up until now?
Within 4 days.
Why as a city have we only ever had one ethnic minority MP and a second one for a short period of time, when the city is predominantly ethnic minority? Because we allow other peoples to choose and make those decisions on our behalf. and we
we're
can't
not involved
influence,
in the
and we're not involved in the process. And it is very easy to get involved in the process. You've just got to be willing to take those steps.
Up to this point of any
Okay, so we're just running a bit over time. Do you have closing thoughts from yourself, Mulana?
Yeah, I think in terms of the concluding remarks that we got from our guests is that we need to make our voice heard, and that comes from mashwara. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would always consult with the people, with the Muslims and non-Muslims alike when it came to matters of the city, for example. He would consult with the Jews. And we need to also implement that sunnah of partaking in the mashwara. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had a group of Sahaba that he would frequently visit, and he would take their mashwara, and from that change came about. So every voice that was heard by the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam took their advice. Any nasiha, he took their advice and he would act upon it. So in the same way, the nasiha that we give, or the vote that we cast,
then
like you said, every vote counts.
the fruits will be there
we
in
could
5,
potentially
10,
make a
15
difference.
years
So,
time.
inshallah,
Why has
let's
Leicester
try
not had
to
a
get more
Muslim
active
MP up until now?
in the political world.
Why?
Why
Why as a
shock up
city
by and
have we only ever had one
I
ethnic
think
minority
Maulana
MP
has
and
eloquently
a
put it
second
from the
one for a
Islamic
short
perspective.
period
It
of
is our
time
duty.
when the city is
if we do not
predominantly
use
ethnic
our voice,
minority? Because we
somebody
allow
else
other
will,
peoples to
and we'll be
choose
left.
and make those decisions on our behalf.
I
we
think it's
can't
summarised
influence-
well.
and we're not
You know,
involved in the
participate,
process. And it
take
is
part,
very
don't sit on the
easy to get
sidelines,
involved in the process.
whatever it is out
You've
there.
just
And
got
if
to
you
be
don't
willing to
know
take those
and you don't know how you can do, then ask.
Running a bit over
There's
time. Do you have
always
closing
somebody
thoughts
out there
from yourself,
who's
Mulana?
done that anorak for a while and learnt everything they needed to. So whether it's Shokhat Bhai, whether it's myself or anybody, whether it is, we can show people how to get involved, and we can learn off other people as well. And if we don't know, I'm sure we can find out who can. Very important.
Beautifully put. And then if you can get in touch with MEND by following us on Instagram, Facebook, or any other social media platform. We have regular meetings monthly where people can come along and get involved with the many sort of initiatives that MEND are doing. And similarly, again, if you want to get involved with Kidm Organisation, you can find us on any social medias and get in touch. Jazakallah khair for listening to us today, talking about Islam and politics with Shokhat Bhai, Brother Rafiq, Mullah Uzair, and myself, Mohamed Jamaal. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Vote that we cast, and he would take their mashwara, and from that change came about. So every voice that was heard by the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam took their advice. Any nasiha, he took their advice and he took that. So in the same way, the nasiha that we give, or the vote that we cast, like you said, every vote counts.
The fruits will be there
We
in 5, 10, 15 years time.
Inshallah,
Why has
let's
Leicester
try to get more
Muslim
active
MP? I think it's summarised
in the
well.
political world.
Participate. Why?
Find Shokhat Bhai and
Whatever minority MP, a second one for a short period of time. How you can win the city is